At the edge of the corral, a figure moved with deliberate steps, boots kicking up dirt, hat pulled low over a face shadowed in determination. No one knew her here, and that was exactly how she wanted it. She wore trousers, a loose shirt, and a vest clothes meant for a man. Only the hard lines of her jaw and the fire in her eyes gave away the truth that no one could yet see. She had grown tired of whispers and narrow paths that women were forced to follow. When the call came for able hands to join the militia and defend the town from the relentless raids, she refused to stand behind the fence any longer. She was not going to let the town's men face danger alone while she stayed hidden. So she had disguised herself, learning how to tie her hair back, how to swing a rifle with the precision of the men she had trained alongside in secret. Every day she had practiced until her muscles memorized what her mind insisted she could do. Tonight she would prove it, though she could not yet know that the true test would not come from the enemy she expected. The Apache war party was moving through the canyons, silent as shadows, each warrior knowing the land like an extension of himself. They watched from afar, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They were ruthless, fierce, and unyielding, but the one among them who noticed her first was not focused on the town. He saw her in the corral, adjusting the straps of her rifle, her eyes scanning the horizon with the same careful caution that would mark a seasoned fighter. Something about her stance, the way she carried herself, made him pause. The wind shifted, carrying her scent and the faint metallic tang of her weapon, and he understood she was no ordinary settler. He moved silently, a shadow among shadows, keeping to the ridges and broken ground, waiting for the right instant to make his presence known. He was a man of few words, but when he acted, it was with the precision of a predator and the patience of a hunter. He knew the plains, the currents of fear, the pulse of the land, and now he had found a spark he could not ignore. She was alone, and though she did not yet know it, she was visible to eyes that could see through the most careful disguises. Inside the town, the air was thick with anticipation. The men of the militia checked weapons and whispered strategies, faces drawn and hands calloused. They did not see her as one of them yet, though they passed her with nods and curt acknowledgment, assuming her a new recruit whose courage they had yet to test. She could hear the distant clang of metal as rifles were cleaned, the low murmurs of men trying to hide the fear they refused to admit. Her heart thudded with the same tension, but it was not fear alone. It was the excitement of finally stepping into a place where she could prove her worth, where she could fight, where she could take a stand. The night settled, bringing shadows that stretched long over the wooden streets. Lanterns swung in the gentle breeze, painting the buildings in a flickering orange light that did little to push back the dark. She had moved into position atop the ridge overlooking the valley, surveying the path the Apache could take. She whispered to herself, repeating the lines she had drilled into her mind, feeling the rifle in her hands like an extension of herself. The air smelled of dust, pine, and smoke from distant fires. Every sense was alert. Every nerve was taut. And somewhere below, the wind carried a signal she did not understand yet, the presence of eyes that watched her with intent. The Apache had decided. He descended slowly, using the cover of scrub and rock, moving toward her in a way that would not alarm the men below. She noticed a flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye, but the shadows were deep and the plains played tricks. She adjusted her aim, not knowing that she was being studied as much as she studied the land. His approach was deliberate, almost ceremonial, the kind that spoke of patience honed over years. She could sense him before she could see him clearly, the air shifting slightly, the rustle of brush faint but deliberate. Then, in a heartbeat, he was before her, a sudden presence that made her drop the rifle just slightly, startled. It was not fear, not yet, but surprise. She had not expected anyone to close the distance this quickly. He did not speak at first. His eyes held something she could not name, an understanding that cut through the fabric of her disguise. He knew that small, terrible truth The secret she had fought to keep was no longer hers alone. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his blade, not threatening yet, but with a promise of action. She froze, the weight of the moment pressing down on her like the first heat of a summer day after a cold night. Every plan she had made, every scenario she had imagined, did not include this. She realized then that she was not facing a simple raid, not just another skirmish. This encounter was different. This encounter was personal. Below, the town still slept under the illusion of safety. The militia did not yet hear the wind that carried danger, did not yet feel the brush of eyes that watched from hidden heights. She could see the buildings, the lanterns swaying, the streets empty but expectant. And above all, she felt the weight of her own choices pressing down. She had chosen to step into a man's world, to challenge the roles assigned to her, and now those choices had brought her to this precipice. The Apache's gaze did not waver. He had seen the truth, and in that instant, she understood that her journey was no longer about proving herself to the town, it was about surviving what had just found her. The moment stretched, long and taut, as though the plains themselves were holding their breath. She felt the rhythm of the land, the distant call of an owl, the faint rustle of a snake in the brush, and the pressing weight of the man before her. Then he moved closer, silent as a shadow, circling her, studying her like one studies a fox trapped in a clearing. Her hands hovered over the rifle again, but her grip faltered. She could not know yet if she was facing death or something else entirely. All she knew was that the wind carried his presence like a signal, a warning that the calm she had prepared for was already gone. Her mind raced, thinking of ways to escape, ways to reach the town, ways to call for help without giving herself away. But every plan collided with the undeniable truth he knew. He knew, and he had choices of his own. The Apache warrior had seen the courage in her stance, the fire in her eyes, and the risk she had taken by stepping into a fight meant for men. Yet in that knowledge, he had also seen vulnerability. The moment was fragile, poised on the edge of decision, and the plain seemed to hum with tension around them both. Suddenly, a gust of wind whipped across the ridge, carrying dust into her eyes, masking her vision. The Apache seized the instant, moving faster than she expected, closing the gap in a silent rush that left no space for hesitation. She stumbled back, her rifle raising instinctively, but not in time to fully aim. His hand caught hers, firm and precise, pulling her into the shadow of the rocks. She struggled, but his strength was controlled, not cruel, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her pause. In that brief moment, the world seemed to narrow down to the two of them, the fire of her will and the quiet power of his presence. She could feel the pulse of the plains under her feet, the rhythm of her own heartbeat, and the undeniable truth that she was no longer in control. Every instinct screamed to fight, to run, to hide, but every glance at the Apache told her that this was no ordinary confrontation. He had plans of his own, plans she could not guess, and his silence was more dangerous than words. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of distant smoke, the promise of a storm, and the unspoken warning that what happened next would change everything. Then, without a word, he moved. She felt herself lifted, her struggles momentarily useless against his practiced strength. Her mind raced, trying to predict his intentions, trying to weigh escape against surrender, trying to understand why fate had placed her in the hands of a warrior who had seen through every lie she had constructed. The town below was still unaware, the militia still unprepared, and she realized, with a chill she could not shake, that this night would not end as she had planned. The fight she had prepared for was not waiting for her in the town. It was here, in the shadow of the ridges, with the eyes of the Apache locked on her and the plains holding their breath. As the wind carried the dust and the distant hooves, she realized the truth she had tried to deny. Her journey had only just begun, and the first step would not be hers to choose. The Apache knew her secret, and with that knowledge came a power she could not resist. Her fate was no longer a path she could walk alone. The ridge fell silent once more, leaving only the sound of her rapid breathing and the faint shuffle of boots over dirt. In that quiet, the first hint of what was to come crept in like a shadow, and she understood the dangerous, uncharted path that lay ahead. The plains were waiting. The Apache was waiting. And she, a cowgirl in men's clothes, had nowhere to hide. The night swallowed them both, and the story of what would happen next hung in the air, unresolved, a tension that would not let go. The ride down from the ridge was rough and swift, the ground a tangle of rocks and scrub that rattled her bones and tested her grip. She had never felt so exposed, so acutely aware of each movement and each breath. The Apache moved with a fluid grace, his every step measured, his eyes scanning the horizon as if reading invisible lines on the land. She tried to anticipate what he would do next, but it was impossible. She was outmatched in strength, experience, and knowledge of his intentions. Her mind raced with questions that had no answers. Why had he come for her? Was it vengeance, curiosity, or something far more complicated? She had no time to dwell. Every second that passed was a step deeper into the unknown. He spoke finally, his voice low, calm, and careful, carrying the weight of someone who was used to commanding without shouting. "You are not like the others," he said. The words were simple, but they struck her with the force of truth. She nodded slightly, unsure whether it was agreement, defiance, or simply acknowledgement of her own secret now exposed. The Apache did not smile. His eyes held a quiet intensity like a fire burning under ice. There was respect in the recognition, but also a warning. He had seen through her disguise, and now she was in his hands. The sun had dipped low, leaving the sky a wash of fading orange and purple, and the air had grown cooler. They moved through narrow washes in dry creek beds, shadows stretching long, shapes merging with the darkening land. Every now and then he glanced back at her, as though measuring her reaction, testing the edge of her courage. She tried to stay calm, to keep her thoughts from spiraling, but the tension was unrelenting. She realized how much she had underestimated the wilderness outside the town's fences. The plains were not only a battleground. They were a teacher, unforgiving and exacting in the lessons it offered. As they moved, she tried to learn what she could from him, noticing small signs in his movements, the way he placed his feet, the way he adjusted his hand on the hilt of his blade. There was discipline in every motion, a rhythm that spoke of countless days spent navigating the land, hunting, surviving, and fighting. His presence was a puzzle she could not yet read, but the pieces were forming an image in her mind, a picture of a man shaped by his environment and hardened by experience. She thought of the town she had left behind, of the men who believed they were the only ones strong enough to fight. She had wanted to prove herself, but now she understood that the lesson was far larger, far more personal than she had imagined. Her thoughts drifted unwillingly to the past. She had grown up on the outskirts of the plains, the daughter of a rancher who respected courage but never questioned tradition. She had watched her brothers train with rifles, ride hard, and prepare for danger while she was told to stay home, tend the animals, and keep her hands clean. She had learned to hide her determination, to channel it into small acts of defiance, climbing fences, riding the old trail horses, practicing with a rifle behind the barn. Every hidden skill had been a secret rebellion, a way to shape herself into something more than the life others planned. Yet nothing had prepared her for the encounter with this Apache warrior, for the sense that her secret could no longer be hers alone. The Apache's voice broke into her thoughts again. "You are brave, but bravery is not the same as understanding." His words were deliberate, and she felt the weight behind them. There was no judgment in his tone, only a statement of fact, an observation that cut to the core of her ambition. She realized that courage alone would not save her now. There were rules in this land, unspoken but unyielding, and she had stepped into them without knowing. Her hands rested on her rifle, but she did not raise it. She could not know whether action would help or hinder, whether resistance would earn her freedom or deepen her danger. The Apache did not speak again for a long stretch. Silence settled between them, a thick, heavy quiet that allowed her mind to wander while keeping her aware of the smallest details. She noticed how his clothing blended with the landscape, how his movements left barely a trace, how his eyes shifted constantly, taking in everything. She realized that this was not just a man. He was a force shaped by the plains themselves, a combination of skill, instinct, and calculation. And she, in all her courage and preparation, was still only a small part of the larger story unfolding around them. Night fell fully, and the sky turned black, scattered with stars that burned like distant fires. They reached a narrow canyon, walls rising steep and jagged on either side. He guided her into the shadows, moving with a precision that made it clear he knew the terrain intimately. She could not see the bottom of the canyon clearly, only dark shapes and the faint glimmer of moonlight on rocks. The canyon swallowed sound, turning even the softest footstep into an echo. She realized that any misstep here could be dangerous, that the land itself demanded attention, respect, and caution. As they settled into a narrow ledge, she dared a glance at him. His profile was sharp against the night, the lines of his face carved with experience. She tried to read him, to understand what he might want, but there was only mystery. She felt the weight of vulnerability settle over her like a heavy coat. The rifle in her hands was useless in this moment, a reminder of how much she had relied on preparation and planning, and how little that mattered when the unknown moved against her. She was trapped, yes, but not broken. She could feel her determination simmering beneath the surface, waiting for a chance to shape the path ahead. The Apache finally spoke, and this time there was a hint of softness, a subtle change in tone. The plains do not forgive mistakes, and men do not always see what lies beyond their own lives. You have chosen a dangerous path. She swallowed hard, sensing that his words were more than caution. They carried meaning she could not fully grasp, as if he was speaking to something buried deep within her. She wanted to ask questions, to understand why he had singled her out, but the canyon's walls seemed to close around her, amplifying her fear and hesitation. She had no choice but to listen, to absorb the lesson he was offering, even if the cost was uncertain. Her thoughts drifted again to the town she had left behind, the faces of the men who thought courage could be measured in actions alone. They had underestimated her as she had underestimated the Apache. The lesson was clear. The world was larger, more dangerous, and far more complex than she had imagined. Every step she had taken, every secret she had kept, had led to this moment, and the tension between what she had planned and what was unfolding was a lesson she could not ignore. She realized that her journey was no longer about proving herself to others. It was about survival, understanding, and navigating the unknown. The Apache was both a threat and a guide, a force that would shape her in ways she could not yet see. And though fear pressed against her chest, she felt a spark of curiosity and determination. She wanted to know who he was, why he acted as he did, and what the next steps might be. She wanted to learn the rhythm of the plains from someone who knew it, to see the world from a perspective she had never considered, even if it meant risking everything she had fought to protect. The night deepened, and the canyon seemed to close in further, the walls swallowing the faint glow of stars. She sensed movement in the shadows, subtle shifts that hinted at life beyond her immediate vision. The Apache had not spoken for some time, yet she felt his awareness like a pulse in the air. Every sound, every breath, every motion was amplified, and she knew she had to remain alert. The tension between them was a delicate balance, a silent dance of power, observation, and understanding. She felt herself stretched thin between fear and fascination, uncertainty and resolve. In the quiet, she began to notice the details of her surroundings, the texture of the rock under her boots, the subtle changes in wind that carried scents of distant fires and animals, the way shadows shifted as the moon traced its path across the sky. She understood that the plains had its own rules, its own language, and that she had only just begun to learn it. And yet, even in this moment of awareness, she could not shake the unease that had settled over her since the ridge. The Apache was still watching, still assessing, and the weight of his knowledge pressed upon her. Time passed in the canyon, marked only by the slow movement of the moon and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. She tried to gather her thoughts, to remember every lesson she had ever learned, every strategy she had practiced. But the reality was harsher than any drill or rehearsal. She had thought she could prepare for danger, but this was different. This was not just a test of skill or courage. It was a test of character, of instinct, and of understanding something larger than herself. She stole a glance at the Apache again, noting how he shifted his weight, how his eyes flicked across the canyon, how he seemed connected to the land in a way she could not yet comprehend. He was a mystery, a force, a teacher, and perhaps something else entirely. She realized that their paths had crossed for a reason she could not yet see, and that the choices she made in the coming hours would shape the story of her life in ways she could not imagine. The tension between them remained unresolved, a thread stretched taut across the darkness. The wind carried a faint whistle from the far end of the canyon, and she tensed, unsure whether it was the plains playing tricks or a signal of something approaching. The Apache noticed it too, his hand moving instinctively toward the hilt of his blade. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, sharp and calculating. She felt the unspoken warning, the reminder that the world beyond the town was full of dangers she had not prepared for. And yet, amidst the fear and uncertainty, she felt a spark of determination, the same fire that had driven her to wear men's clothes and step into battle. That fire had not dimmed. It had only been tested. She did not speak. There was nothing to say that could ease the tension or explain the choices that had brought her here. All she could do was watch, learn, and wait. The Apache seemed aware of every thought, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt. And in that awareness, she realized something else. He was not merely an adversary. He was a mirror reflecting the truth she had tried to hide, the strength she had tried to deny, and the danger she had chosen to face. The canyon swallowed the next moments in silence, leaving only the pulse of uncertainty and the faint, steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. The night stretched endlessly, full of shadows, secrets, and possibilities she could not yet name. And somewhere deep in the darkness, the plains whispered that this was only the beginning, that the story had many paths, and that the next step would demand courage, cunning, and an understanding of forces she had yet to grasp. The first light of dawn filtered into the canyon in pale, cold streaks, glancing off the jagged rock walls and casting long, uneven shadows across the ground. She had spent the night crouched against the stone, her hands tight around the rifle she had barely dared to touch. The Apache had not spoken for most of the night, yet she could feel his presence like a steady heartbeat beside her, a constant reminder of her exposure. Her muscles ached from the ride down the ridge, from holding herself still against the rough terrain, but it was nothing compared to the tension coiled tight in her chest. Every nerve screamed for movement, yet every instinct told her to wait, to watch, to measure her surroundings. The canyon was alive with small noises, a distant bird calling, a scrape of stone under some hidden animal, the whisper of wind through narrow passages. She realized how little she truly knew about the land beyond her town. She had imagined the plains as wide and empty, dangerous in their openness but simple in their threats. This canyon proved her wrong. Danger could lurk in silence, in shadows, in the smallest crack between rocks. She had assumed the Apache she had encountered was a single challenge, a puzzle to be solved. Now she understood he was only the beginning. He finally moved, shifting beside her without breaking the quiet. His eyes scanned the canyon, alert to every sound, every movement, every sign of life she could not yet perceive. She noticed his breathing, slow and measured, and the way his hands rested near the weapons he carried, ready but never overzealous. He was a master of restraint, and she felt the weight of that discipline pressing on her own lack of experience. Her mind spun with questions. Why had he singled her out? What did he intend to do with her? Did he mean to take her back to the mountains, or somewhere far more dangerous? Below, the town stirred with the first faint signs of morning. A few windows reflected the rising sun, children's laughter began in the streets, and the militia prepared once more for the possibility of raids. They were unaware that their new recruit had vanished, that a secret she had carried so carefully had been exposed, and that the Apache who now guided or restrained her through the canyon could change everything. She thought of the men she had hoped to impress, the pride she had imagined winning, and realized that those ambitions were meaningless now. Survival demanded focus, understanding, and a reckoning she had not expected. As they moved deeper into the canyon, she began to notice small details she had overlooked: broken branches, footprints she could not identify, the faint smell of smoke lingering in the wind. He moved with purpose, not haste, and she could feel the rhythm of his movements dictating her own. She wanted to test him, to challenge him, to reclaim some sense of control, but she knew it would be futile. Every attempt to assert herself here would be measured, noted, and likely turned against her. She had always believed courage could bend outcomes, but she was beginning to understand that sometimes courage alone was not enough. The Apache finally spoke, his voice carrying quietly in the canyon's tight walls. "You carry fire, but fire can burn the hand that holds it," he said. His words were not a threat. They were a warning, a lesson wrapped in calm authority. She studied him closely, trying to read meaning, trying to anticipate the lesson behind his calm eyes. She realized that he was testing her, not just physically, but mentally. He was measuring how she reacted under pressure, how she thought, how she understood danger and her own limitations. Every instinct she had learned in secret, every drill, every practice, was being weighed against a reality far harsher than anything she had imagined. As the canyon widened into a small plateau, she noticed faint signs of previous activity: footprints, scorch marks from small fires, and broken vegetation. Someone had been here before. It was not recent, yet it carried a sense of vigilance, of survival, and of purpose. She glanced at him, trying to detect whether he had noticed the signs or whether they were an opportunity for her to prove her awareness. His gaze remained calm, sharp, scanning the horizon as though he could read the canyon like a map. She realized that he understood the land as more than geography. He understood its history, its dangers, and its secrets, and she was only now beginning to see how unprepared she truly was. He stopped suddenly at the edge of the plateau, his hand lifting to point toward a distant ridge. She followed his gesture, noticing a faint plume of smoke curling in the morning air. It was not the town, not a settlement she recognized. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was it a camp? A signal? An enemy force waiting to ambush them? She realized she had no way of knowing, no way of preparing beyond staying alert and following his lead. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "You see smoke," he said, his voice low but clear. "What you do not see is what it warns of." She nodded, uncertain whether she had answered correctly. She felt exposed in a way she had not anticipated. Her confidence, built on disguise and preparation, felt fragile against the reality of the plains, against the knowledge that every choice could carry consequences far beyond her understanding. She began to grasp the depth of the conflict she had walked into. It was not simply the town versus the Apache raids, not simply courage versus danger. It was a network of decisions, of secrets, and of forces she could barely perceive. As they moved closer to the smoke, she noticed signs of habitation: crude stone markers, remnants of tools, and scattered debris. There was a rhythm to the landscape here, a sense of life and vigilance that made her pulse quicken. She could not tell if the previous inhabitants had left willingly or been forced out, but the signs carried an unmistakable tension, a residue of human conflict. She realized that she was walking into layers of history and danger simultaneously, each layer shaping the present in ways she could not yet predict. Her thoughts returned, briefly, to her disguise and the town she had left behind. She had imagined entering battle as a man, proving her skill and earning recognition. She had not imagined becoming part of a story that was larger than her own ambition, a story shaped by unseen forces and hidden histories. She felt the tension coil tighter, realizing that her own actions could ripple through this landscape in ways she had not foreseen. Every step mattered, every glance, every choice, and the weight of it pressed upon her with the clarity of a hammer striking an anvil. The Apache did not break stride. He led her carefully, as if the land itself dictated the pace. She noticed how he avoided certain paths, how he navigated uneven ground, and how he seemed to anticipate every possible danger before it could appear. She was learning by observation, yet the lesson was incomplete. Every step brought new questions. Who had lived here before? Were they allies or enemies? Was the smoke a trap or a beacon? Her mind refused to rest. The morning air grew warmer, carrying the faint smell of earth and smoke. She sensed movement in the distant ridges, subtle shifts that could be animals or people. She raised her rifle instinctively, then lowered it again, realizing it was useless to react without understanding. Every instinct told her to fight, yet every experience told her that knowledge was more valuable than strength. The Apache noticed her hesitation and glanced at her briefly, eyes calm but piercing. She realized that he was assessing more than skill. He was reading her mind, her reactions, her ability to endure uncertainty. They reached a small overhang where the canyon walls provided cover. He paused and gestured for her to rest. She did, cautiously, scanning the surroundings while feeling the exhaustion settle in her bones. Her thoughts churned. The town, the militia, the fire of her ambition, and the reality of the unknown. She understood she was part of a larger story now, one she could not control, yet one she could influence if she was careful and observant. The tension between survival and ambition was sharper than ever. While she rested, she considered the Apache's motives. Was he a captor, an enemy, a teacher, or some combination she could not yet understand? He had not harmed her, yet he had not released her. He had seen her secret and chosen to act in a way that defied simple explanation. She realized that understanding him would be as important as understanding the land itself. Her curiosity sparked despite the fear, a dangerous mix that both sharpened her instincts and threatened to cloud her judgment. Suddenly, the faint sound of voices carried on the wind, distant and difficult to place. She froze, her heart hammering. The Apache moved immediately, lowering his stance, eyes scanning the ridges and plateaus beyond. She could see his muscles tense, the precision in every movement. The voices grew slightly louder, though still muffled by distance. She could not tell if they were friendly, hostile, or neutral. Her pulse raced. Every lesson she had learned in the barn and on the ridges now collided with the unknown. He signaled her to move, silent gestures that guided her along a narrow ledge with sheer drops on one side. She followed, every step careful, muscles burning, mind racing. She realized that the conflict she had imagined town against raids was only a fragment of the reality. Layers of alliances, hidden dangers, and unseen forces all pressed in around her. Every choice could open opportunities or lead to disaster. As they rounded a sharp bend, the smoke became clearer. It was a small camp, not yet abandoned, with a flickering fire and shadows moving just beyond the glow. She caught glimpses of figures, perhaps two, perhaps three, whose movements were deliberate, cautious, and aware. She could not tell who they were or what their intentions might be. The Apache crouched beside her, silent, eyes locked on the camp. She realized that this moment, this encounter, was critical. Observation and patience mattered as much as courage, if not more. She glanced at him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the sharpness of his gaze, the way his presence shaped the very air around them. She understood that whatever was about to happen in the canyon would test her in ways she had not imagined. The Apache was more than a guide or captor. He was a force of reckoning, a challenge to her assumptions, a mirror to her hidden strengths and weaknesses. And in that realization, the tension became almost unbearable, a tight coil of fear, anticipation, and determination. The canyon held its breath, the sun climbing slowly, the wind shifting unpredictably. She and the Apache were poised at the edge of the unknown, and every instinct screamed that what came next would not only test her courage, but define her path. The small camp below was a mystery, a threat, and a puzzle all at once. She could see the smoke curling higher, smell the faint tang of burning wood, and feel the pulse of hidden life. Her hands rested on her rifle, but she knew that strength alone would not decide the outcome. Intelligence, patience, and instinct would be the tools that carried her forward. And in that moment, she understood with full clarity. The battle she had sought in the town was only a shadow of the conflict she now faced. The plains, the canyon, the Apache, and the unknown forces moving in the distance were all pieces of a larger story she had barely begun to see. Every step, every breath, every choice would shape what came next. The tension was unbroken, unresolved, and the story of her journey hung in the balance, waiting for the next move. The air in the canyon had grown heavier, thick with heat, dust, and the distant, low hum of life she could not yet see. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every rustle in the scrub a warning. She crouched beside the Apache, muscles taut, eyes scanning the distant camp where smoke curled lazily into the morning sky. Her hands itched for the rifle, but she understood that this was a moment that demanded patience over force. Every instinct in her body told her that what lay ahead could decide more than her own fate. It could shape the story of the town she had left behind, the men who still waited, and the unspoken balance between danger and survival. The Apache had shifted his stance, moving with the quiet authority of someone entirely in tune with the land. He did not speak, but his presence radiated control, focus, and power. She watched him closely, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the precise way his eyes followed every shadow, every movement of wind or light. She understood now that he had chosen her not only for her courage, but for her ability to learn, to adapt, to endure uncertainty without panic. Her pulse quickened. The camp below was no ordinary gathering. There was strategy in its chaos, discipline hidden beneath the smoke and the movements of its inhabitants. Every second brought a new realization. She was not merely an observer. She was a participant, caught in a story she had only glimpsed from a distance until now. The first figures became clearer, moving between rocks and fires, cautious but deliberate. There was tension in the way they held their hands, in the rhythm of their footsteps. She realized they were armed, alert, and likely as wary of intruders as she had been of them. Her mind raced with possibilities. Were they scouts, hunters, raiders? And more importantly, would they recognize her if she moved closer? She kept her eyes on the Apache, whose calm presence reminded her that strategy mattered more than impulse. She had prepared for battle in the town, for a confrontation with familiar faces, yet this unknown world demanded a different kind of skill. Observation was survival, and patience could be more deadly than any rifle. The Apache shifted slightly, signaling with a tilt of his head for her to follow. They moved along a narrow ledge, each step measured, every sound minimized. Her legs burned with effort, her heart hammering with a mix of fear and anticipation. She felt the weight of every choice pressing against her, the knowledge that one wrong move could spell disaster not only for herself, but for the delicate balance of what was unfolding below. She realized that the conflict she had imagined between townspeople and raiders was only the surface. The real challenge was navigating the unseen layers, understanding the motives, anticipating reactions, and surviving the unpredictability of both the land and the people who controlled it. As they drew closer, the Apache paused once more. He crouched behind a rock formation, eyes narrowing as he studied the camp below. She followed his gaze, noticing details she had missed before, the way shadows moved in the firelight, the faint tracks around the edges of the smoke, the subtle differences in the terrain that suggested hidden traps. Her pulse quickened. Every sense screamed alert, and every lesson she had learned in secret, the drills, the practice, the careful training now collided with the reality of the moment. This was no rehearsal. This was not preparation. This was survival, observation, and judgment all at once. She swallowed hard, feeling the tension coil tighter. Her mind flashed back to the town she had left, to the men who assumed strength could only come from size and experience, to the whispers she had endured for years. All that seemed distant, irrelevant, compared to the immediate danger and mysteries surrounding her. She had chosen courage, and now courage was testing her in ways she could not yet measure. The Apache's hand brushed against hers briefly, a reminder that she was not alone, but that she was under scrutiny, guided, and restrained simultaneously. Every instinct told her to run, yet wisdom whispered that patience and observation were her most valuable tools. A sudden movement caught her eye. One of the figures at the camp had shifted closer to the fire. She tensed, fingers brushing the rifle, only to realize that the movement was deliberate, controlled. This was not a random act. They were organized, disciplined, and aware. She felt a chill run down her spine. She had believed she understood danger, yet here it was layered, complex, and far more intelligent than she had imagined. The Apache's eyes met hers for a brief instant. In that glance, she saw both reassurance and challenge, a reminder that every action carried consequence, that every second demanded clarity and courage. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, the sun climbing higher, casting sharper lines of shadow and light across the rocks. The camp below was becoming more defined, the smoke clearer, the figures moving with purpose. She realized that the balance of power was delicate. One sound, one misstep, could trigger chaos, expose them, and change the course of everything she had fought to protect. She tightened her grip on the rifle, though she knew it was only a part of the equation. Strategy, timing, and understanding would matter more than raw strength in the moments to come. Suddenly, a distant shout echoed from the far ridge. It was faint but carried, bouncing off the canyon walls in a way that magnified its urgency. She froze, heart racing, eyes scanning the ridge for the source. The Apache moved immediately, body low, hand on the hilt of his blade. Her pulse quickened. The shout had broken the fragile quiet, introducing unpredictability she could not control. She realized then that the conflict was expanding beyond their immediate presence. Forces beyond her understanding were moving, and the choices made in the next moments would be crucial. The Apache gestured silently for her to follow, leading her along a narrower path closer to the edge of the plateau. She moved with care, aware that the slope beneath her could betray even a slight misstep. Every rock, every brush, every shadow seemed alive with the potential for danger. She could feel the tension in her own muscles, the adrenaline sharpening every sense, making her acutely aware of the wind, the sounds of movement below, and the rhythm of her own breathing. She realized that this was the most intense moment of her journey so far. From her position, she could now see more of the camp. There were at least 4 figures, moving in careful synchronization. She noticed the glint of metal in their hands, the disciplined way they adjusted their positions, the subtle signals exchanged without words. The Apache's gaze remained steady, analyzing, predicting, assessing. She felt both awe and fear. These were not ordinary people. They were skilled, aware, and ready for anything. She understood then that her survival depended not on fighting recklessly, but on understanding, timing, and careful decisions. A sudden flare of movement caught her attention. One of the camp figures had lifted something from the fire. A signal, perhaps, a warning or a test. She could not know. Her pulse raced, every instinct screaming that the balance could shift in an instant. The Apache moved closer to her, his presence a steadying force, a reminder that patience and awareness were as vital as courage. She tried to calm her breathing, focusing on the details, the direction of the wind, the patterns of movement below, the subtle sounds carried through the canyon. Every moment was a lesson, every second a test. Time seemed to stretch, each heartbeat echoing in the stillness. She became aware of her own doubts, her own fears, the vulnerability that came from stepping into a world she did not fully understand. Yet there was also a spark of determination, a fire that had driven her from the town, through disguise and into this canyon. That fire had not dimmed. It had grown sharper, tempered by the stakes she now faced. She knew that the coming moments would demand more than courage. They would demand insight, adaptation, and a deep understanding of the forces surrounding her. The figures in the camp began to shift again, moving toward what she guessed was a lookout point. Their actions were deliberate, precise, and silent, a rhythm she could barely follow. She felt the tension coil tighter, a knot in her chest that refused to loosen. Every glance at the Apache reinforced the reality. They were on the edge of discovery, of confrontation, and perhaps of something far larger than either of them could predict. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more dangerous than the last. A sudden flicker of motion at the far edge of the canyon made her flinch. The Apache noticed it immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward the hilt of his blade. She understood that their position was precarious, that discovery could happen at any moment. Her grip tightened on the rifle, though she knew it was only a part of what might save her. Strategy, timing, patience, and awareness would determine the outcome. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat counted. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint sound of movement from above. She could not tell if it was another observer, a scout from the camp, or simply the echo of the canyon playing tricks on her senses. The Apache's eyes narrowed, assessing, calculating, preparing for action without rushing. She felt the pressure of his focus, the weight of his experience pressing against her in silent expectation. She realized that she had to match his awareness, to see, anticipate, and understand what was coming before it unfolded. The camp below stirred once more, the smoke twisting in the wind, the figures moving with renewed purpose. She could sense the possibility of a confrontation building, a moment that could decide the fate of not only her but the town she had tried to protect. Her pulse raced, her mind alert to every detail, every potential threat, every subtle clue. She realized that the climax of this conflict was approaching, though she could not yet see its shape. Every instinct, every lesson, every ounce of courage would be tested in the moments to come. The Apache finally moved, signaling her with a tilt of his head. They would descend further, closer to the camp, closer to the unknown. Her muscles tensed, her senses sharpened, every nerve alert. The wind carried dust, smoke, and the faint scent of life, of preparation, of danger. She realized then that the story she had stepped into in the town had become something larger, something that demanded courage, insight, and an understanding of forces she could barely imagine. She glanced at him, reading the focus in his eyes, the tension in his movements, the unspoken command that required her full attention. The canyon seemed to hold its breath around them, the plateau poised between shadow and light, uncertainty and action. Every second stretched, every heartbeat echoed, every sound amplified by the stillness. She understood that the climax of her journey was imminent, the confrontation unavoidable, and the resolution still unknown. Her own courage had been tested in secret, in disguise, in preparation, but the true trial was now. The Apache beside her was both ally and unknown, guide and challenge, threat and protector. The camp below was no longer distant. It was a presence, a puzzle, a potential danger that demanded complete awareness. She felt the tension coil tighter than ever, the anticipation stretching every sense to the limit. The ridge ahead offered a precarious path downward, a narrow trail that could conceal them or expose them. She followed him without question, heart hammering, muscles straining, mind alive with observation and calculation. Every shadow, every movement, every flicker of smoke could signal a change, a threat, a discovery. She understood that what was coming could decide more than her immediate fate. It could shape the story of the town, of the Apache, and of the choices she had made to step into a world she barely understood. The sun had climbed higher now, casting sharper shadows, highlighting every ridge, every slope, every potential hiding place. The camp below shifted, aware of something in the distance, perhaps sensing movement they could not yet see. She felt the tension coil in her chest, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and determination that made her pulse race and her mind sharpen. She knew that the climax of this story, the confrontation that would test every skill, every instinct, and every ounce of courage, was drawing near. The Apache gestured once more, moving with precision and confidence down the narrow trail. She followed, aware that every misstep could be catastrophic. That discovery could happen in an instant, and that the tension she had carried since the ridge would soon reach its peak. The canyon seemed alive, echoing the heartbeat of the land, the pulse of potential danger, and the weight of every choice that had led them to this moment. Every step brought them closer to the camp, closer to the unknown, closer to the confrontation that would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. The wind shifted again, carrying dust, smoke, and the faint sounds of movement. Her heart raced, muscles tensed, senses alert. She understood that the climax was near, the moment of highest tension, the point where courage, patience, and insight would determine the outcome. And as they paused at the edge of a small rise overlooking the camp, she felt the full weight of what lay ahead. The figures below moved in deliberate patterns, smoke curling in the wind, shadows stretching across the ground. The Apache beside her remained calm, focused, ready. She realized that every lesson, every preparation, every secret had led to this moment. The tension was at its peak, the stakes higher than ever, and the resolution still out of reach. The canyon held its breath, the land poised between shadow and light, anticipation and action. She tightened her grip on the rifle, eyes scanning the camp, mind racing with possibilities, heart pounding with the knowledge that the next moments could define everything. The Apache signaled, silent, precise, and she understood that the climax was imminent. Every instinct, every decision, every ounce of courage would be tested. The tension stretched like a taut wire, vibrating with the promise of action, confrontation, and the unknown that lay just ahead. The moment had arrived. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint scent of smoke and dust from the camp below. She crouched beside the Apache, muscles tense, eyes fixed on the figures moving among the fires. Every moment of waiting had sharpened her senses. She knew the next step would require courage, focus, and careful timing. The Apache gave her a slight nod, almost imperceptible, and she understood it as permission to move, to act, but only in tandem with him. She had learned that the world outside the town demanded more than recklessness. It demanded understanding, respect, and the courage to act with intention. They descended carefully, slipping along the narrow ledge and into the shadow of a rock formation. The camp below seemed unaware of their approach, the figures too focused on their own tasks to notice the movement above. Her heart raced, adrenaline coursing through her veins, yet a strange calm had settled over her. She was no longer the cowgirl hiding in men's clothes, pretending to be someone else. She was a fighter, a survivor, a person who had learned to read danger, to adapt, and to endure. Every secret she had carried now felt like a tool, a strength she could use rather than a burden. As they neared the edge of the camp, one of the figures suddenly turned, stepping closer to the fire. She froze, expecting a shout or a warning, but the Apache moved swiftly, silently, his blade flashing in the sunlight as he disarmed the man without a sound. She held her breath, watching the precision of his movements, understanding that his skill was not only physical but mental. He read the intentions of others with clarity she had never imagined. The man crouched, hands raised, eyes wide with surprise and respect. The Apache gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that no unnecessary harm would come, but that control was absolute. Her turn came quickly. She moved forward cautiously, the rifle in her hand steady, eyes scanning for threats. Her mind was clear, her instincts sharp, and every lesson she had learned in disguise and in secret guided her actions. She stepped into the open, hands raised slightly, a gesture of trust. The figures in the camp froze, uncertain, assessing. Then the Apache gestured, and she lowered the rifle, letting her presence be calm, confident, and deliberate. The tension in the camp shifted subtly, curiosity replacing fear, awareness replacing suspicion. One of the men stepped forward, cautious but deliberate, his face carrying the marks of experience and resilience. He spoke quietly, asking questions she could not fully understand, yet the tone was not hostile. The Apache answered for her, explaining in low, measured words who she was, why she had come, and the truth behind her disguise. The camp listened, tension easing with every detail revealed. She felt a sense of relief, a release of the pressure that had held her chest tight since the ridge. Understanding had replaced uncertainty, and for the first time since her capture, she felt a sense of control returning. As the day unfolded, she learned the story of the camp. They were not raiders but survivors, displaced by the same dangers she had faced in her town. They had feared outsiders, trusted few, and relied on vigilance to endure. Her presence, initially a threat, became a bridge. The Apache had chosen wisely in bringing her here. She saw the value of patience, the importance of observation, and the strength that came from understanding the motivations of others rather than assuming the worst. Her respect for the Apache deepened. He had taught her more in the silent hours of the canyon than she could have learned in years of struggle in town. The day passed with cautious conversations and careful movements. She shared stories of the town, the militia, and the challenges she had faced while disguised as a man. The camp listened, absorbing details that aligned with her own experiences. She realized that the fear and suspicion she had encountered were mirrored here in different forms, and that courage was universal, whether expressed in battle, survival, or understanding. The Apache remained beside her, a steady presence, guiding without imposing, teaching without speaking more than necessary. His lessons were quiet but powerful, rooted in experience, insight, and respect for life. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the camp had accepted her presence. Tension had given way to cautious trust, and she had earned respect not through bravado, but through observation, patience, and courage. She felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she had imagined when she first donned men's clothes and joined the fight. She had stepped into danger, faced the unknown, and emerged with new understanding and skill. The Apache's approval, subtle but unmistakable, reinforced the truth she had carried within herself all along. Courage mattered, but wisdom and understanding made courage powerful. As evening fell, the Apache led her to a higher ridge overlooking the canyon and the distant town. She could see the smoke curling faintly from chimneys, the lights beginning to glow as night fell, and the town alive with the routines of life. She realized that her journey had bridged two worlds, the one she had left behind and the one she had entered, harsh, unpredictable, and full of lessons. She felt a sense of connection to both, understanding that courage, adaptability, and understanding could shape outcomes in ways she had never imagined. The Apache finally spoke, his voice calm, low, and deliberate. "You have learned well," he said. The words carried weight, not as praise alone, but as recognition of the journey she had undertaken, the challenges she had faced, and the growth she had achieved. She nodded, feeling the truth in his statement. She had stepped into danger, faced uncertainty, and discovered strength she had not fully known. The canyon, the camp, the Apache all had shaped her in ways that were permanent and profound. That night, around the campfire, she shared stories with the survivors, learning their names, their struggles, and their hopes. Laughter began to return, quiet but real, bridging the gap between fear and trust. She realized that the lessons she had learned extended beyond survival. They included understanding others, adapting to circumstances, and finding strength in observation and patience as much as in action. The Apache remained nearby, silent, his presence a reminder that true power often spoke quietly but carried immense weight. When dawn arrived, she and the Apache prepared to leave the camp. The survivors had offered food, supplies, and advice, treating her with respect and trust. She felt a sense of completion, of growth, and of readiness. She understood that her return to the town would be different. She was no longer the cowgirl who had disguised herself as a man to prove her courage. She was a fighter, a strategist, and a person who had faced the unknown and emerged with insight, skill, and respect. As they rode back toward the town, the Apache beside her, she reflected on the journey. She had learned that bravery alone could not ensure survival. Observation, patience, and understanding of the environment and the people within it were equally important. She had discovered new strengths within herself, forged in the crucible of danger and uncertainty. She felt a sense of pride, not from recognition or validation, but from the knowledge that she had acted with courage, intelligence, and compassion. The town appeared in the distance, familiar yet changed in her eyes. She could see the people moving about, unaware of the events that had unfolded in the canyon. She felt a sense of responsibility, of connection, and of purpose. The journey had taught her that courage mattered most when combined with wisdom and understanding. She had faced a threat, learned from an ally in the Apache, and bridged the gap between fear and trust. The Apache finally spoke as they entered the outskirts of the town. "The world is larger than you imagined," he said. "But so is your strength." She nodded, understanding that his words were both a reminder and a recognition. She had faced the unknown, navigated danger, and emerged not only unbroken but wiser, stronger, and more capable. The townspeople noticed her return, some surprised, some wary, but none could deny the change in her presence. She carried herself differently, with confidence tempered by experience, courage shaped by understanding, and strength balanced by insight. She had returned not only to claim recognition but to bring knowledge, strategy, and hope. The Apache watched silently from the ridge before turning to leave, a quiet figure disappearing into the plains. She understood that his role had been vital, guiding her through danger without claiming credit, teaching lessons without imposing authority. His presence had shaped the outcome, and she would carry that guidance forward in every choice she made. As the town welcomed the day, she shared her story cautiously, revealing lessons learned, dangers faced, and the truths she had uncovered. The militia listened, absorbing her insight, recognizing that courage alone could not ensure survival. The townspeople began to see her in a new light, not merely as a girl who had dressed as a man to fight, but as someone who had faced the unknown, navigated complexity, and emerged stronger and wiser. She reflected on the lessons of the canyon, the camp, and the Apache's guidance. Trust, observation, patience, and courage had combined to shape the outcome. She understood that survival depended not only on strength, but on understanding others, respecting the environment, and adapting to circumstances beyond control. Her journey had transformed her, revealing the depths of her character and the power of courage guided by insight. The sun rose higher, casting warm light across the plains. She stood at the edge of the town, looking toward the horizon, feeling a sense of completion and purpose. The journey had tested her, shaped her, and prepared her for challenges yet to come. She had learned that bravery alone was insufficient, but that when combined with wisdom, patience, and understanding, it could shape not only survival but success, trust, and respect. The Apache had disappeared into the distance, leaving her to carry forward the lessons he had imparted. She felt gratitude, respect, and determination. The town, the plains, and the canyon had tested her, and she had emerged stronger. She had bridged the gap between fear and trust, learned the value of patience, and discovered strengths within herself she had never known. As she walked back into the town, people began to notice the change in her. Her presence commanded quiet respect, not through intimidation but through the confidence shaped by experience. She shared her lessons carefully, offering insight into the dangers of the plains, the importance of strategy, and the value of understanding others. The militia listened, recognizing that her journey had prepared her not just for battle, but for leadership, guidance, and the protection of the town. Evening came, and she found herself on the ridge where the Apache had first appeared. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke and dust, and the horizon glowed with the last light of day. She felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. The journey had been dangerous, unpredictable, and transformative. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and unknown forces, yet she had emerged wiser, stronger, and ready for the challenges ahead. The town settled into quiet, unaware of the depth of what had transpired. She stood, rifle slung across her back, eyes on the horizon, reflecting on the lessons she had learned. Courage without wisdom could falter, observation and patience were as important as action, and understanding the motives of others could prevent unnecessary conflict. She had faced danger, discovered hidden strengths, and earned respect in a way that went beyond disguise, ambition, or personal pride. As night fell, stars appearing one by one, she felt the satisfaction of survival, growth, and understanding. The Apache had been a guide, the canyon a teacher, and the camp a proving ground. She had discovered that courage combined with insight could shape outcomes far beyond expectation. The plains were vast, unpredictable, and challenging, but she had learned how to navigate them, how to endure, and how to thrive. The town slept beneath the quiet sky, unaware of the transformation that had taken place. She felt a sense of readiness, strength, and hope. Her journey had not only tested her, but prepared her for the life ahead, teaching lessons that would remain long after the adventure had ended. She understood that the world was larger than she had imagined, and that her courage, patience, and understanding could guide her through anything. Looking toward the horizon, she breathed deeply, feeling the warmth of the day fading into the calm of night. The Apache was gone, but his lessons remained, and she carried them with her. A quiet strength that would guide every choice, every step, every challenge. She had faced the unknown, endured danger, and emerged not only unbroken but transformed. And in that quiet moment, with the plains stretching endlessly before her and the town sleeping peacefully below, she understood something simple but profound. Courage was not just the act of facing danger. It was the wisdom to act with understanding, the patience to observe, and the insight to navigate the unknown. She had discovered all of that and more. The journey had ended, the story resolved, and the lessons she had learned would carry her forward into every sunrise yet to come. The wind whispered softly across the ridge, carrying the scent of the plains and the memory of the canyon. She felt a smile tug at her lips, not of triumph alone but of quiet satisfaction, knowing she had faced fear, survived the unknown, and emerged wiser, stronger, and ready for whatever lay ahead. The adventure had ended, the tension resolved, and a new chapter in her life began, one of courage, understanding, and hope.